You know, I've been around for a while. Met some interesting people. Done some crazy things. So you just might think that there's not much that can take me by surprise. You'd be wrong. The world is full of stories, science and things that amaze and confound me. Every single day, incredible mysteries that keep me awake at night. Some I can answer. Others just defy logic. Are we living on a hostile planet? In Newfoundland, a small community is devastated by a mysterious explosion.
It really looked like the bomb had gone off.
Was it a secret weapon or a freak of nature? On Lake Michigan, a yacht vanishes into thin air.
This is the most extraordinary thing I have ever witnessed.
Was it swallowed by an evil fog? And in the Indian Ocean, two giant flashes of light send a nation into panic.
Everybody knew for sure this was something to be very concerned about.
Yeah. It's a weird world, and I love it. Listen, nature, isn't it wonderful? You know, Mother Earth, she's all we have. Over 6 billion of us occupy possibly the only planet in the universe that sustains life, but yet we take everything from her and give very little back. Is she getting mad at us? Are killer tsunamis, quakes, and tornadoes the Earth's way of saying enough is enough? Maybe. But there's something else going on with our planet, freaks of nature that are impossible to explain and can strike you out of the blue. Sunday, April 2nd, 1978. 12-year-old Darren Bickford was making his way home on Bell Island, a small community in Newfoundland on the east coast of Canada.
I was outside riding my pedal bike, and I knew one of my favorite shows came on television at 11, so I was pedaling back home.
But Darren wouldn't get to watch TV that morning. Instead, he would witness one of the world's greatest unsolved mysteries.
As I approached the end of our driveway, all the birds stopped chirping, all the dogs stopped barking. It just went so still. And then it was boom, like a shotgun blast, followed immediately by another boom, and then followed immediately after the second boom. The ground shook underneath me. It was the biggest noise I have ever heard in my life.
Suddenly, something unbelievable appears right in front of Darren, a glowing ball of light.
It was hovering off the ground when it appeared out of thin air, and the beautiful colors of blue made up most of the center of the ball. And outside of the blue, it was orange and yellow mixing together. And then just like that, the ball of light just disappeared into thin air. This is without a doubt the strangest, most terrifying thing I've ever seen. But I was terrified, but I was transfixed by it. It was so beautiful looking, this ball of light, and the colors and the way it swirled around. You couldn't help but stare at it. Even though I was scared, I was shaken, but I loved it, and I've never seen anything like it. And I guess I will probably never see nothing like it again in my life. It was all over in 4 or 5 seconds. But those 4 or 5 seconds are burnt into my brain just like a roll of film.
The massive explosion was heard over 60 kilometers away. Its impact wreaked havoc. People reported exploding TV sets, blue flames shooting from electrical outlets, and a strange beam of light coming from the sky. This bizarre event was dubbed the Bell Island Boom.
After this happened, everyone was in bewilderment.
One house seemed to catch the brunt of the boom. It belonged to Darren's grandfather, James Pickford.
Fuses in his fuse panel were glass fuses that were screwed into the panel. These had come out like bullets and went about 20-odd feet the length of their hallway and buried themselves in the wall.
Grandpa's chicken coop is demolished. The chickens inside, killed instantly.
It really looked like a bomb had gone off in his shed.
It's a bizarre scene. But even more baffling are 3 large holes blown into the ground.
There was a cone-shaped hole going 3 or 4 feet down. We didn't know what it was.
This weird and mysterious incident soon generates massive interest around the world.
A lot of people came, the media came. The television news crew had me describe to them what I had seen.
Myself, I thought something happened to the world, or someone dropping bombs or something.
Now, this is really weird, or what? Little kid is riding his bike, minding his own business, when boom, this town is suddenly smashed by some mysterious explosion, turning fuses into lethal weapons, exploding TV. And what about those poor chickens? Awful. What could have caused something like that? Was that me? Jim Farrell was a local fire investigator and one of the first to the scene. After being asked to investigate, he sends his report to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The RCMP officially concludes that it was lightning. Farrell begs to differ.
I said, I don't believe it's lightning. I've never encountered anything so great as this force.
But Jim isn't the only one who wants answers. Soon, Darren gets a surprise visit.
There were these strange men. I was told they were scientists from Los Alamos, New Mexico.
The Los Alamos National Laboratory built and tested the first atomic bombs. Could there be a connection? The men interview everyone involved, including Darren and Jim.
I told them everything I knew, and next thing, I was more or less ordered to turn over my exhibits to a gentleman.
33 years later, and I would still like to know to this day, what was the ball of light that I saw? If it was lightning, how did it remain stationary and motionless in the air? How did it appear out of thin air and then disappear into thin air? Those things aren't supposed to happen, but they do happen. I saw it happen.
The 3 strangers leave without giving any concrete answers. What were they looking for? What did Darren Bickford and the residents of Bell Island witness? And what could have created the Bell Island boom? Science journalist Brian Dunning believes the answer isn't so earth-shattering after all.
There was actually about 600 booms between starting in late 1977 going through mid-1978. Nobody could really localize exactly what was happening, but it was heard from South Carolina all the way up through Canada.
Could the Bell Island boom be part of a bigger phenomenon? What could be responsible for this rash of strange booms?
As so often happens when you have a mystery, all kinds of people started coming up with crazy explanations for what these might be. And the most common one was people thought it was some kind of a military test of a new super weapon. Something like maybe that Nikola Tesla might have envisioned. Tesla, when he was in his later years and was getting kind of crazy, he was coming up with all kinds of proposals for ideas. He never built them or anything, but one of his ideas was a giant atmospheric superweapon that would move a large chunk of the atmosphere over a city and destroy it. And some people were saying that this might be a test, an actual test. Maybe someone actually built this weapon and we're trying it out. We don't know any superweapons that are consistent with what happened at Bell Island It's purely conjecture. It's purely just a hypothesis that you make up. There's no evidence supporting that. Maybe it is the explanation, but we don't have any reason to think so. What started happening in December of 1977 is that the Concorde was flying over. It was making its supersonic flights between New York and Europe, and that created sonic booms coming over the land.
When planes fly through the air, they make waves, just like a boat in the water. The faster you fly, the closer the waves build up at the tip of the airplane. And when a plane actually goes faster than the sound waves can move, they pile up into one big sonic shock wave that can cause damage to the areas on land below it. Could the Belle Island boom just have been the effect of a sonic boom from the world's first supersonic passenger jet?
Because it was a sonic aircraft and made a big sonic boom, it was supposed to go way out to sea. However, on hot days, because of fuel expansion issues, it would have to take a shortcut route and it would go over Nova Scotia. For all the 600 mystery booms that we heard, most of them were correlated with sonic booms from the Concorde and other aircraft.
Could the world's fastest passenger jet have caused the tumult on Belle Island? Or was it something far more deadly?
It may be something that science doesn't know about yet.
A small Newfoundland community is thrown into chaos by an earth-shattering boom. Was it caused by a supersonic airliner? Carl Stefan is a professor of engineering. His theory is very electric.
What I've read of the Belle Island boom sounds consistent with a super lightning bolt.
Super lightning bolts are extremely rare, but freakishly powerful bolts of lightning.
Most lightning has a negative charge. However, about 10% or less of lightning bolts are positively charged. Positive lightning also tends to travel farther. It can go several miles from cloud to cloud, for example. So the eyewitness reports of the Belle Island boom that said the sound was heard for many miles around, that's consistent with a long positive lightning bolt that, was going through several clouds in several miles distance before it hit the ground and did all that damage. The current is about 10 times what your typical lightning bolt would have. So it would make a much louder boom.
Superbolts almost always occur in the upper atmosphere over oceans. Very rarely do they hit land. But do they explain the weird things seen that day on Belle Island? Like glass fuses acting like bullets.
Strange things happen when very large currents flow through wires that aren't designed to carry them. Tremendous forces are set up, magnetic forces that can cause ordinary objects to fly like projectiles.
Okay, but what about the poor chickens that were roasted in their coop?
Chickens are susceptible to being electrocuted. What can happen with any kind of animal that are in a place where lightning hits the ground is the current running along the ground can actually run up through the legs and through the body and kill the animal.
Stefan's superbolt theory seems to help answer some of the mysterious incidents on Belle Island. But does it explain the weird glowing ball of light witnessed by Darren Bickford? Stefan believes the answer lies in an incredibly rare natural phenomenon.
The ball of light hovering sounds a whole lot like ball lightning. Ball lightning is sometimes seen to form right after a lightning strike. And it either disappears silently or it can explode. We suspect that it is an electrical phenomenon. It may be something that science doesn't know about yet.
Did lightning make fuses explode and act like bullets? Did it roast those chickens? Questions persist. If scientists don't even know what ball lightning is, how can they think that that's what Darren saw? If it was a superbolt, why did high-level personnel from a top-secret lab show up to investigate? And finally, what caused the 3 craters at James Bickford's place? Lee Tizard is an electromagnetic weapons researcher. He thinks Mother Nature shouldn't take the rap for this one.
I believe the evidence indicates that it was caused by something man-made and not something by nature. It was an accident.
But what could cause an accident on this scale? What kind of accident blows holes in islands?
During that time frame, the Russians were pounding North America with a very powerful and disruptive signal called the woodpecker signal.
The woodpecker signal was a radio signal used by the Soviets in the 1970s to provide early warning of an enemy weapons launch. By bouncing radio waves off the Earth's upper atmosphere, the ionosphere, they could analyze the returning waves for disruptions indicating a missile attack.
It was a 10 hertz signal, 10 vibrations per second, and it sounded like this. It sounded like whack, 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 whack. It was just extremely powerful. It was so disruptive that the UN and a number of countries banded together at the UN and protested to the Soviet Union when they found out that it was originating from Gomel in the Soviet Union, and they protested and demanded it be stopped, but it really didn't stop for a long time. I think it stopped in like the mid-'80s, but it went on for at least 10 years, the mid-'70s to the mid-'80s.
According to Tizard, the woodpecker signal was a ticking time bomb. He believes its use accidentally created a column of electromagnetic energy known as a standing columnar wave over North America. Despite being invisible to the eye, this huge energy field had the potential to be disastrous.
I believe that the standing columnar wave that was established collapsed. And when the standing columnar wave collapses, it creates these vortices of electromagnetic energy that have to dissipate. It sent down 3 spinning vortices of electromagnetic energy, and that's what we believe struck, explaining the 3 holes.
Did a Russian radio signal create an electromagnetic column over North America which accidentally collapsed? If so, why did it happen on a remote island off the coast of Canada? And does it explain the glowing ball of light?
It's believed that the standing columnar wave that was created by the woodpecker signal was attracted to Bell Island because of the iron ore content. It was a former iron ore mine.
Did the iron-rich Bell Island act as a giant magnet for a massive burst of electromagnetic energy caused by the Soviets? Or was it struck by a superbolt with a side dish of ball lightning? Whatever the truth, Darren Bickford and the other survivors of the Bell Island boom may never know. Weird, or what? A mysterious, deadly fog haunts Lake Michigan, swallowing ships and planes and bending time. Is this a true freak of nature? Is it weird, or what?
In 3 meters, turn right.
You know, modern technology is amazing, isn't it?
Turn right.
I mean, with nothing but this tiny gadget, I can navigate to within an inch of wherever I want to go. Look.
Prepare to turn left. Turn left. Go straight ahead.
It even talks to you. What a nice lady. And it's so accurate.
Turn right.
Yeah.
Turn right. Turn right.
Can't turn right, you stupid thing. There's a wall here.
Go straight ahead.
Ah.
Go straight ahead. Calculating route.
Have you ever felt yourself disoriented, like you're lost from the woods?
Route.
Well, I am.
Go straight ahead.
No!
Calculate.
It's not a pleasant experience, I can assure you. The Great Lakes of North America hold 1/5 of the world's fresh water. They're also one of the most popular areas for sailing in the world. But on a summer night, nearly 2 decades ago, Kathy Dorr discovered these gentle waters aren't quite what they seem.
The events of that night challenged my conventional view of reality.
It's a warm July evening when Kathy sets off for a leisurely sail.
Clear sky, light chop. It was beautiful out, and it was hot.
Just around nightfall, her calm journey is upended by something mysterious and alarming.
Very abruptly, we encountered fog, a very strange fog. It just descended on us. Poof, just like that.
In minutes, the fog engulfs the boat.
We feared that we might have a crash. At that point, I became very, very, very cold. In fact, I was freezing.
Blinded and cold, Kathy and her yacht have seemingly disappeared into a void.
The boat began a strange aquatic dance. It began to turn, almost as if it were pirouetting on its axis. There was no movement of the sea. This was not a whirlpool. I looked at the captain and I said, "Who's steering the vessel?" And he said, "Nobody, it's steering itself."
Amazingly, the vessel does 3 complete 360-degree turns. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the fog suddenly vanishes. They regain control of the boat and head for home. But when Kathy looks at her watch, she makes a startling discovery.
I've gone over this 100 times. We should have been back by 10 p.m., and it was after midnight. We cannot count for 2 hours. I don't know what happened to that time.
Kathy's pleasure cruise had somehow become a nightmare.
I just remember thinking, this is the most extraordinary thing I have ever witnessed.
What happened to Kathy and her yacht? Remarkably, her experience isn't the only weird event to occur on Lake Michigan. Numerous unexplained mysteries have occurred here. Passenger airplanes vanishing without a trace, legends of ghost ships appearing out of nowhere, and thousands of UFO sightings. Could the mysterious fog Kathy encountered be linked to these strange events? Was it a natural phenomenon or something unknown? Pilot Bruce Gernon believes he has the answer.
When I first heard Kathy's story, I immediately realized that she had experienced what I call electronic fog.
Bruce believes that sometimes different magnetic fields from the Earth collide in powerful freak thunderstorms over remote bodies of water, such as Lake Michigan. The result is a metallic, highly charged fog.
It's been known to actually chase vessels and try to capture them. And once it captures them, it clings to them, and the people become disoriented because it doesn't make sense to them. No one has ever realized that it's attached to them. Everyone always thinks that they're moving inside this fog. They don't realize that the fog is moving with them.
Once formed, the electronic fog is magnetically attracted to metal objects like ships and airplanes, wreaking havoc on their navigational controls and displaying other incredible properties.
It has an electromagnetic energy within it that can become so powerful that it can affect the fabric of time itself.
Time warping fog? An interesting notion. But is there any science that can back it up?
NASA has just recently announced that they have discovered something new in certain types of thunderstorms. And it appears at the top of the storm, emitting antimatter.
Created by massive lightning within a storm, antimatter produces 10,000 times more power than nuclear energy. Some scientists speculate that this sort of power could open doors to new dimensions of time and space.
And this is a critical discovery that relates to the electronic fog.
Incredibly, Gurney says he knows what it's like to be enveloped by the electronic fog. He claims one of them captured his plane over the Bermuda Triangle and that he traveled 300 miles in only 10 minutes.
And that would be impossible to do in a small plane like this. You'd have to be going close to 2,000 miles an hour. And when I landed back at Palm Beach International, we always topped off the fuel tanks. And on this particular trip, we used 10 gallons less fuel than we've ever used before. And I'd made this trip a dozen times. And I saved that receipt. I have the original.
Could a mystery fog have sucked Kathy Dorr forward in time? Do we need to rewrite our science books?
This is a very real phenomenon.
A woman and her yacht suddenly disappear while sailing on Lake Michigan. Were they taken by a freak of nature known as electronic fog? Dr. Don Adrian Rice doesn't think so.
Human beings are not always reliable witnesses to our own experiences.
For him, the explanation is far more straightforward.
I think what the person was experiencing was sensory deprivation.
When our senses are deprived, say with a blindfold, our brains try to fill in the gaps, often with strange results.
Typically, they began to either hallucinate visually, they could have auditory hallucinations, or they could have kinesthetic hallucinations with the body.
Could a regular fog cause Kathy Dorr to hallucinate and mistake an ordinary event for something fantastical? Maybe. But how could it explain those 2 missing hours?
You're having a great time at a party or someplace, time seems to go by very quickly. If you are sitting in a meeting, time goes very slowly. And of course, objectively, the clocks are moving exactly the same, but that's not your experience of it.
Dr. Rice is so convinced that sensory deprivation is the culprit, he's offered to recreate the weird events of an electronic fog in his lab. All he needs are headphones, a set of goggles, and ping pong balls. That's right, ping pong balls.
The experiment itself is one where an individual is deprived of visual information by having goggles with ping pong balls cut out, placed over the eyes, which lets in a little light. But otherwise, the person is deprived. And at the same time, we'll have them listen to white noise sounds.
The participants are not told how long their senses will be deprived.
Tell me a little bit about what you experienced.
I've seen sort of outlines of things, almost like looking at clouds and you see shapes in them a little bit. Sort of like the outline of an eye or a mask sometimes. Maybe the sort of shape of a house.
A sensation almost as though I was sinking down a little bit.
I've started feeling a little bit uneasy, a bit nauseous, as it felt like things were moving around a little bit.
The darkness around my eyes was growing, as though one was being lowered into the ground. Interesting experience. A little bit unsettling.
Dr. Rice has proved that depriving the senses affects perception. But did they also lose track of time?
I was thinking about 5 minutes. I wouldn't have been surprised if it was actually 2 minutes.
I was thinking probably somewhere between 5 and 10, like closer to 10.
It didn't feel like very long, maybe, I don't know, 5 minutes.
Incredibly, the experiment lasted for 20 minutes.
I think the most interesting thing for all 3 was the time distortion, because this lasted for 20 minutes, and they experienced it from 5 to 10 minutes. So again, that's consistent with the experience that the person had in the fog, or others who have been in these kinds of situations where they experienced time distortion. So in this short experiment here, if that were to be generalized to a larger situation, a person may experience themselves as losing even more hours. So that would be very possible. But what you can actually see here is how our brain works and how our brain tries to make sense out of a situation where the senses are deprived. So your brain continues to do that.
I guess it is pretty powerful what your mind decides to do, you know, in a situation like that. It sort of goes where it wants to go.
It's a bit peculiar that your mind can sort of play tricks on you like that.
I don't know where that time went.
Wow, that's an incredible theory. The fog caused a severe case of sensory deprivation, which made Kathy hallucinate. But you know what? I'm sick of watching all these wonderful experiments. I want to try this and see for myself. Great. Hello? Hello? Okay, here we go. Just wait a minute. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm definitely seeing something. I think Dr. Rice might be really onto something here. Yeah. Yeah. I can see white. I can definitely see white. And I am very disoriented. But I have to ask, can this explain how an entire yacht could get swallowed up by a fog? Hello? Hello, are you there? Can someone call a doctor? American author David Childress disagrees these strange occurrences are simply tricks of the mind.
This is a very real phenomenon. It's not just something that's a psychological aberration or hallucination on their part.
For Childress, the answer lies in ley lines, a matrix of magnetic pathways crisscrossing the Earth, connected by ancient ceremonial sites. He believes they can create vortexes of energy and manifest as the paranormal fog.
Other people call these ley lines different things. The ancient Chinese call them dragon lines. We might call them earth currents, or in Australia, the Aboriginals there call them dreaming tracks. The Earth itself is like a giant magnet. And it has a North Pole and a South Pole of magnetic energy. And that energy is created by the rotating, swirling magma inside the Earth. It too is magnetic. And with this ball that's the planet Earth, with the magnetic lines running all through it, it has its own special energy. And it's where these magnetic lines cross and come together in certain powerful areas, geometrically scattered around our planet, that these vortex, hyperspace spots occur. And it's my view that these vortexes of energy occasionally are activated and become alive and become portals or doorways to other time-space dimensions. And this is what people get caught up in the Bermuda Triangle or in the Great Lakes Triangle.
Incredible. But does it explain what happened to Kathy and her yacht?
What may have happened to Kathy on Lake Michigan was that she was in one of these vortexes when it became activated. And suddenly a mist or fog starts to come in and surround you. You're not in the same place that you were. You feel you're in another dimension.
If, as Childress believes, Kathy really traveled to a new dimension, how in the world did she get back?
Many of the people who have gone through these bizarre vortex areas and survived are probably very lucky. We'll never know how many people have been in these same vortex areas and situations, and they never came back.
Does this solve the mystery? Did Kathy Dorr sail into a patch of fog or into another dimension? Was she merely hallucinating as a result of sensory deprivation? Or had she entered a time vortex created by ley lines? Whatever the answer, it's most definitely weird, or what? A blinding double flash of light is detected over the Indian Ocean. Did it nearly cause World War III?
Everybody knew for sure this was something to be very concerned about.
When it comes to the mysteries of Mother Nature, there's a lot of things that aren't quite as they seem. It's all a matter of perspective. On one hand, it could look perfectly normal. On another, it could look like the end of the world. That's exactly what happened in 1979. Jeffrey Richardson is a U.S. security analyst. He knows lots of secrets, but he's yet to solve one of the biggest, the truth behind a mysterious event known as the Vela incident.
It's a fascinating anomaly. It's a mystery that reads like a techno-thriller.
The tiny Crozet Islands lie in the Indian Ocean, over 1,000 miles south of Africa. Around 3 a.m. on September 22nd, 1979, something extraordinary happened there. Without warning, two giant, blinding flashes of light lit up the sky.
Everybody knew for sure this was something to be very concerned about.
Incredibly, 70,000 miles away, the flashes were also detected by a U.S. satellite called Vela 6911.
That triggered a very high level of alert, and from there, word went to the White House that something might have happened. They started calling in advisors.
They took it very seriously, rushing CIA agents to the area in military planes. But what triggered this extreme response?
In 1979, the United States had concluded a series of arms control treaties with the Soviet Union.
The Cold War rivals had just agreed to stop nuclear tests. But the flash detected by Vela 6911 could mean the Soviets were just playing games.
The Vela satellites' prime purpose was to detect nuclear detonations. What they saw was something that's very indicative of a nuclear explosion.
Had the Soviets broken faith? Had they really violated the new treaty and set off a nuclear bomb? Each side had thousands of nuclear warheads pointed at the other. The stakes couldn't be higher.
At first, the administration tried to keep wraps on the story, and it was full-court press of intelligence activities to try to determine what was actually going on.
With a potential global crisis on its hands, the U.S. tries to confirm its suspicions by sending CIA sniffer planes to the Indian Ocean. Equipped with sensitive radiation detectors, they get an unsettling surprise.
There was no radiation detected. It was a mystery. They even sent people, CIA officers, into West Africa to get the leaves off trees to see if there was a residue from a nuclear explosion.
So what had Vela really seen?
They didn't know what actually happened. It's been such a mystery for so many years. In terms of strange events, I think it's, at the top of the list.
What happened over the Indian Ocean? What could cause a giant flash of light so powerful it could be seen 70,000 miles away? Tom Reed is an expert in nuclear weapons.
I've fired them, I built them, I've seen them go off.
He believes there is only one explanation.
I believe it was a nuclear test. A nuclear detonation is kind of hard to hide. I mean, it's not some pin drop in the night. It's a very major event.
But if no one witnessed the explosion, How can he be sure that Vela detected a nuclear blast?
A nuclear explosion has this sort of fingerprint. It is unmistakable.
This fingerprint is caused by the way a nuclear bomb explodes. First, it blasts out deadly gamma radiation at the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second.
Technically, it's a flash, but to the human eye, it's this ball of fire and the sun has come to Earth.
Then, as the explosion grows, the shock wave produces a second flash.
It's very mind-boggling, and it's very frightening.
Does the data from Vela confirm the signature double flash of a nuclear bomb? The recorded flashes are shown as curves on a graph.
These curves, those are like fingerprints. This first peak is the device going off. As the bubble expands, the energy releases again, and so you get this second rise.
But if Vela really saw a nuclear blast, where was the other fingerprint? The radioactivity.
They decided to put it in a part of the world where it's mostly water. You then pick a weather condition like a typhoon. A really serious typhoon could wash all the radioactive debris right back into the ocean. The best solution to pollution is dilution.
Incredibly, weather records confirm a typhoon was in the area just before the flash. But who would take such elaborate precautions to conceal a nuclear test?
People don't develop nuclear weapons just because it's Thursday. There has to be some reason. Every nation that has gone nuclear has gone in response to a very clear and present threat.
Did some nation have a reason to feel threatened in 1979? Reed believes the answer is obvious.
Israel has very clear and present dangers on its borders. The Israelis have technology, they know weapons, but they didn't have uranium.
Israel could only make the bomb if it had a supplier. But who else was threatened enough to upend the test-banned apple cart?
At the same time, the Soviets were pouring troops into Africa. South Africans mine uranium as a byproduct of gold. They got so much of it, they don't know what to do with it.
With Soviet forces in nearby Angola, did South Africa have reason to partner with Israel and build a nuclear bomb? Does this explain why a flash occurred in the remote regions of the Indian Ocean?
It is quite clear to me that this was a test by the Israelis with logistical support by the South Africans.
Why is it that whenever someone sees something weird, they always assume the worst? I mean, honestly, is the world so paranoid? Are we really looking at a massive Cold War cover-up? Was the Vela incident nothing more than a crazy conspiracy theory? Or is there another way to solve this mystery? Nuclear testing. It's a plausible theory, but not everyone agrees.
Vela never recorded a secret nuclear test.
Giant flash of light over the Indian Ocean puts the world on nuclear alert. Was it a freak of nature or something more sinister? Professor Richard Muller is a physicist. U.S. President Jimmy Carter appointed him to investigate the Vela incident.
It was an important international issue with diplomatic consequences, and they needed good scientific review of the data.
Muller has analyzed the same information as the nuclear experts, but he's come to an entirely different conclusion.
When we began our study, we were all convinced this really looks like it was a nuclear explosion. Next step, though, is to check ourselves. We're all scientists who have discovered things. We know the process of discovery consists of coming up with an idea, with a hypothesis, and then really checking and double-checking yourself in every possible way. So we had a long list of questions that we wanted to have investigated. Next step was to have these teams look at these questions, get back answers to us. But after that first day, I was pretty convinced this was a nuclear bomb. But when we did a scientific review of the data, there was something new and different.
They discovered that Vela had connected its data with two light sensors called bang meters.
A bang meter was a relatively simple device designed to detect flashes of light. It's spelled B-H-A-N-G. It's actually named after a drug, using an Indian term, a drug that if you take it, gives you hallucinations, has you see flashes of light. So someone with a sense of humor named these bang meters.
But remarkable, the double flash recorded by each of the two bang meters was different.
The two pulses from the two bang meters didn't match each other. That was a real mystery, but it indicated that this thing just didn't look right.
But if there was no blast, what could have caused a signal that almost caused a nuclear crisis? The experts are mystified until Mueller has a flash of insight. What if it wasn't anything on Earth at all?
The Vela satellite is at a medium Earth orbit. It's far away in space.
70,000 miles above the planet, Vela wasn't protected by Earth's atmosphere. It was bombarded by tiny bits of rock and metal called micrometeorites.
These micrometeorites don't reach the ground because the atmosphere slows them down and absorbs their energy. A satellite such as the Vela satellite is frequently hit by micrometeorites.
But even if micrometeorites smacked into Vela, how could specks of space dust replicate the massive double hump shock wave of a nuclear explosion?
If a micrometeorite hits the surface of a satellite, it knocks off dust. Dust reflects sunlight differently into the two bang meters. This could be the signal.
Is it possible the whole world was freaked out by a fleck of space dust knocked loose by a microscopic space pebble? After running more tests, Mueller and his team finally reached a conclusion.
What we thought was a bright flash thousands of miles away was actually just a dim flash that's only a few inches away. Vela never recorded a secret nuclear test. It was micrometeorites. That's almost certainly what we saw back on September 22nd, 1979.
Could this whole mystery be solved by something as simple as space dust? After all, no one actually ever saw the flash. Mueller's theory became the official explanation of the U.S. government. But not everyone is convinced.
Clearly, to me, from a political point of view, there's every reason in the world to try to not talk about this, form a committee, and kick it downstream.
Incredibly, in 2010, declassified South African documents revealed nuclear discussions with Israel in the years leading up to the Vela incident. Could the space dust explanation just be a cover-up?
The mystery was basically solved back in 1979. The people who understood the arguments understood them and realized we were right. There's no issue here. But there are people who refuse to give up. There are people who argue we never landed on the moon. It was all videotaped in the New Mexico desert. There are people who believe that the Kennedy assassination had gunmen behind the grassy knoll. There are conspiracy theorists who keep these things alive despite the fact that they were pretty much settled by people who understood the arguments at the time.
In the end, we are left with a mystery. Was the Vela incident proof of a secret nuclear weapons test, or was it merely some space dust that nearly took the world to the brink of disaster? Weird, or what? So there we have it. Stories of mysterious freaks of nature from all over the world. On the east coast of Canada, an earth-shattering boom stuns a community and leaves scientists scratching their heads. On Lake Michigan, a mysterious fog terrorizes a sailor and alters the very fabric of time. And over the Indian Ocean, a blinding double flash of light creates a nuclear crisis. Are these stories evidence of mysterious forces at work within the world? Do we dismiss those who claim they are true? You decide. Join me again next time for more stories that will undoubtedly be weird or what? You know, I've been around for a while. I've met some interesting people. Done some crazy things. So you'd think that there wasn't much that could take me by surprise. You'd be wrong. The world is full of stories and science and things that amaze and confound me every single day. Incredible mysteries that keep me awake at night. Some I can answer, and others just defy logic. Are curses real? In Britain, a mysterious painting is blamed for a string of deadly house fires.
But the one link between them all is the crying boy.
Is it the work of a supernatural arsonist? In Florida, a sinister doll ruins the lives of anyone who crosses it.
Fear. A lot of fear.
Can a child's toy possess the power to destroy? And in California, a wealthy heiress embarks on the most bizarre construction job in history.
The spirits were coming back to get their vengeance on her.
Is she driven by a deadly family curse?
Yeah, it's a weird world, and I love it. Do you believe in superstition and bad luck? Most of us do. And I don't mean the usual stuff like broken mirrors, or black cats, or walking under ladders. We all know about those. But did you know there's literally thousands of things that can bring you misfortune? Like number 13. In Japan, it's number 4. In Italy, it's 17. And in Australia, it's number 87. And did you also know, oh no, it's bad luck to kill a ladybug? And there's more. Oh, hey, don't do that. Never place shoes on a table. You'll have bad luck for the rest of the day. And dropping a pair of scissors is a warning that a lover is unfaithful. Is it really possible? Can our lives be altered for the worse by inanimate objects? Can we be truly cursed by things beyond our control? Whoa. Whoa, thank goodness. She's faithful. 1985, Rotherham, England. A devastating house fire destroys the home of Ron and Mary Hall.
They had lived in their rather nice terraced home in Rotherham for 27 years.
The story was investigated by Kelvin Mackenzie, former editor of The Sun, Britain's highest-selling newspaper.
There had been a fire in this terraced house, a chip pan fire. It burned down most of the house.
But this is no ordinary blaze. Firefighters make a bizarre discovery in the ruins.
There was a picture, an artist's picture, of a crying boy. And despite everything else going up in flames, it survived.
How could a painting be immune to fire? As he works on the story, Mackenzie makes a startling discovery. This is no isolated incident. Firefighters have come across the crying boy before, in the ruins of dozens of destroyed homes.
There was a fire officer in the Rotherham area who claimed to have logged 50 separate examples of houses which had the crying boy on the wall having some kind of fire.
The more the editor learns, the stranger the story becomes. The Crying Boy was painted in Madrid in 1969 by a little-known Spanish artist, Bruno Amadio. Cheap reproductions were sold widely in Britain during the 1960s and 70s. But the house fires are the first time it's been linked to tragedy.
There's a sense that out there is a curse of the crying boy.
Mackenzie isn't prepared for the reaction. The paper is inundated with stories of the crying boy.
Mrs. Jones says her place burnt down in Cornwall. The White family in Harrogate in Yorkshire, their place went. I was absolutely gobsmacked, to be truthful, at the huge avalanche of stuff that started coming our way.
These news stories raise an alarming possibility. The crying boy isn't just surviving fires, it's starting them.
The one link between them all was the crying boy.
As fear grows over the threat posed by the picture, Mackenzie launches a campaign to destroy every last copy of it.
Save your house, send us that crying boy art, and we will destroy it for you before it destroys you. We were literally swamped by it. So we then took all the work, we stuck it up together, made a bonfire, lit it, up it all goes. And that way, we'd actually taken away the curse from them. The reality was that because there was no email, and because the old snail mail, people couldn't be bothered to do it, actually, they were swamping the newspaper. And actually, funnily enough, because this had happened somewhere at the thick end of 25 years ago now, were the crying boys and the fires to happen today, this would be a massive worldwide story because people would pick up on it around the world. The crying boys, there would suddenly be fires in the Philippines and in Vietnam and in lots of other ways. It would have rippled out a lot more, but it stayed very narrowly within the sort of Rotherham, Wigan area for some inexplicable reason.
The Curse of the Crying Boy is one of the strangest stories Mackenzie's encountered in 40 years as a journalist.
That kind of story is a story which everybody will read because everybody has a feeling about curses and walking under ladders, and what happens is 25 years later, we're still talking about it.
Is the curse real? Can a painting actually cause house fires? This is the stuff of nightmares, isn't it? I mean, you hang a painting in your house, and the next thing you know, it's burned to the ground. Could a painting have power? It's weird. Or what? But what I want to know is, who is this boy? And why is he so sad? Can anyone smell something? Oberon Zell is the co-founder of the Church of All Worlds.
I would say that the Curse of the Crying Boy is a really genuine modern curse.
Zell is not only sure that curses exist, but that they take different forms.
The Curse of the Crying Boy is what we call an object curse. That's a curse that is associated with a material object of some sort, as opposed to one that's put out upon a person or a family.
According to Zell, some of history's most infamous hexes were actually object curses.
You know, the curse of the mummy's tomb. These are the kind of things which don't involve somebody deliberately laying a spell, but misfortune is associated with them.
But if the crying boy is an object of misfortune, where did the evil come from?
Everything that we are, everything we do, everything we think is stories. So the stories themselves is what has the power. The curse is embedded in the story that's told about it. And the belief in that story and the repeating of that story is what has given the curse its power. Huge numbers of people know about this curse and believe in it, and that gives it an enormous amount of power. A curse, like a blessing, is a story. And the story acquires its power depending on how many people embrace it and believe in it and hold to it. The Curse of the Crying Boy has acquired an enormous amount of power because it's become a legend that people believe in. And the more people believe in it, the stronger it gets. If one person believes in a curse, like the Curse of the Crying Boy, then you could say they're just a nut job. But when it comes to where hundreds of thousands of people believe in it, then it acquires enormous amount of power, and it shapes the world as much as it is shaped.
For Zell, it's simple. We need look no further than the boy who is staring out at us. But who was he? And why was he crying?
He had been an orphan whose parents had died in a fire, and that's why he was sad and struck dumb.
Living in Madrid in 1969, the mute and homeless boy was found wandering the streets by the artist, who was so struck by his grief he decided to paint him. Just a few days later, his studio mysteriously burned down.
He accused the child of having started the fire, and the child fled.
Why would a mute child commit arson? Zell's explanation: because he was a fire starter.
A fire starter is someone who has a pyrotechnic ability to create fires. Not necessarily intentionally, although that may be too, but it's a psychic phenomenon like telepathy and clairvoyance and such.
But it can never be proved. Tragically, the orphan boy was apparently killed in a car accident years later. But some believe his ability to start fires with his mind lived on in the painting.
The child was cursed. Wherever his picture appeared, fires would break out.
Could the crying boy be the carrier of an object curse? And is the fact that I'm talking about it actually making the problem worse? Or could there be a rational explanation?
The story of the crying boy is real.
In Britain, dozens of house fires are linked to a mysterious painting that survives the flames. Is the crying boy cursed? Mechanical engineer Michael Golliner studies fire and combustion at the University of California, San Diego.
I don't believe it's a curse on the painting that's causing it not to burn.
In Gollner's thinking, the idea a painting could survive a house fire isn't strange.
It depends on what stage of a fire that room got to. And it depends on what was burning, at what time the fire brigade got in. There doesn't have to be any sort of curse.
The critical factor, says Gollner, isn't what's in the picture, but what it's made of.
The Crying Boy painting is probably made of some kind of hardboard or dense particle board. It's the hardboard that it's painted on that's causing it not to burn in a full room fire.
According to Gollner, particle board is almost fireproof, unlike the rest of the contents of a typical home.
Say you have a large fire growing. It's very hot, and all the gases in the room, all the materials will flash and ignite. That Crying Boy painting is painted on a material that's much harder to ignite than things around it, so it could definitely survive a room fire.
Another factor that could have helped the painting escape the flames is the way it's mounted. Gollner thinks if the Crying Boy is hung with ordinary string, the painting will fall down as the string burns off, and that's what saves it.
What's gonna happen is it won't ignite on the floor. We have all that cool air which is gonna blow in on the bottom, so you know it's gonna be really hard to ignite.
But how does Gollner explain the dozens of house fires linked to the Crying Boy? Simple. It's a coincidence.
The probability of a Crying Boy painting, which was maybe reproduced 50,000 times, and house fires, which happen every day throughout all of England, of those colliding and happening, is very likely. I wouldn't be afraid of having this painting in my home. There's no curse on it. It's all a matter of the materials and the fire that's occurring. What's really important, though, is that it just wouldn't look good in my house.
To prove his theory, Gollner has set up an experiment.
We have gas flow.
For the first time, he hopes to reveal what happens to the painting during a blaze.
We're gonna simulate what a room fire in a typical Yorkshire townhouse would have been. I'm excited. We're gonna have a pretty big fire going here. It's gonna get very hot in there. For sure, we're gonna ignite most of the items in that room.
The temperature inside the room quickly rises to almost 1100 degrees Celsius. Even firefighters in full gear couldn't survive there. Suddenly, something happens that seems to confirm Gollner's theory. The Crying Boy falls to the ground.
Looks like there was so much air current blowing air through here that it looks like it actually blew the painting off of the wall and off of the hook that was made for it.
It's exactly as Gollner predicted. By falling to the floor,
The painting is now in the coolest part of the room.
If the painting was on the wall, it most likely would have ignited.
Goldner is convinced the experiment proves the fears around the painting are groundless.
The story of the crying boy is real, and that people had these paintings on their walls, and some of them survived the fire. The curse is just a fabrication, or really it's just people's imaginations running wild, trying to describe a behavior that happens everywhere. Not every fire flashes over. If the fire brigade gets there in time, the fire's out and the painting's safe. You saw that painting last a very long time. So really, depends on the fire, depends on the painting, depends on where you place it.
Investigative journalist Chris Horry agrees. He's convinced the crying boy story was fabricated from the start.
It exploits an element of ignorance and an element of superstition. Two big parts of the tabloid package, it has to be said.
Horry has a surprising explanation for the uproar around the picture. He thinks it was a salvo in a growing circulation war between Britain's two largest newspapers.
There were two tabloids here. One was The Sun, the other one was The Mirror. The Mirror was more old-fashioned. Then along comes The Curse of the Crying Boy. This was absolutely meat and drink to The Sun.
Horry believes The Sun jumped on the crying boy story and ran with it.
The editor, Kelvin Mackenzie, is known as a kind of genius of the tabloid arts. He'd worked out that this was the biggest selling painting, so 1 million people had it or whatever on their wall. So if he wrote about that, there's 1 million potential customers.
Mackenzie's masterstroke, according to Horry, was his offer for readers to send their paintings to the paper.
People could send in their crying boy picture and have it safely disposed of, as though it was asbestos or nuclear waste or something like that, that you couldn't simply put in the bin yourself. Well, this was a hallmark of The Sun in those days. It didn't simply report the news, wanted to be part of the story whenever possible. And see, it is part of the story. Even now, we're still talking about it. So it was a walking story, it had legs, it would run and run and run, and it was a talking story. Everybody was talking about it. So it was absolutely perfect. And it turned into a Sun crusade against the crying boy, as though the painting had some kind of evil force in it, with the Sun claiming the credit for saving the population of Britain from this inexplicable curse. Absolutely genius, brilliant tabloid journalism.
Do I believe in the curse of the crying boy? The answer to that is I do. I believe in curses generally. I believe in bad luck generally. I'd never go under a ladder. And if you ask anybody, they will avoid certain things and doing certain things. Somebody brought to me a piece of art of the crying boy about a year ago. And do you know what? I refused to have it in the house. They wanted basically to present it to me. I wouldn't have it, and we carried on talking, but I insisted that it stayed in the porch. And so that's 25 years ago. I don't want that piece of work in my house. We definitely didn't make it up to sell papers.
So was the curse of the crying boy a media creation? Did the paintings have supernatural powers? Or was it just a series of strange coincidences? Weird. In Florida, a woman's life falls apart after a bizarre encounter with a toy. Can a children's doll bear a curse?
It scares a lot of people, including me.
You know, one of the great things about being a grandfather is being able to watch my grandkids play, especially with their imaginary friends, but we all did it, right? I mean, we think guys like this are real, and we give them personalities and names and presents, and we give them real love, and they love us in return. Yeah. But did you ever have an imaginary friend who wasn't quite so friendly? One that scared you out of your wits? Meet Robert.
April 2007, Key West, Florida. 52-year-old Heather Clement visits the East Martello Museum.
I was wandering around the museum and I was just on my cell phone, like I always am.
And I went upstairs to the top of the building and kind of checked it out because it's beautiful up there. Continued to talk on my phone, wandered downstairs, and walked out the door.
But what began as a pleasurable day out soon turns into anything but.
Weird things started happening, one at a time that I didn't really pay attention to.
In the days that follow, Heather suffers an inexplicable string of setbacks in every part of her life.
My boyfriend and I breaking up, my car breaking down, and I can't explain that. And then I lost a job, the job that I came down here for.
Heather gets a new job, but her workplace burns to the ground. And her run of bad luck doesn't end there.
I had a date, and I don't hear from the guy. And I finally get a text that says, sorry, been in the hospital, got hit by a car.
She begins to suspect it's more than chance or coincidence.
It was pretty frightening, because I mean, nothing that I did was right.
Alarmed, Heather decides to seek help. She consults a psychic. What she learns chills her to the bone. She's been cursed.
There were a lot of emotions that went through me. Disbelief, absolute disbelief, fear, a lot of fear. I didn't believe in any curses. I didn't believe in anything like that.
Who or what would want to curse Heather? The psychic tells her a 100-year-old exhibit at the East Martello Museum called Robert the Doll.
I knew all about Robert before I went there. I'd read about him, and he's in a lot of stories. Robert the Doll is a 3-foot doll, and he is enchanted. He gets blamed for a lot of things in Key West.
Incredibly, hundreds of others also claim to have suffered extreme bad luck after visiting Robert the Doll. Could a toy really invoke a curse? And why would it strike Heather?
I start looking back and going, maybe it is Robert.
Then she remembers.
And I kind of blew past him.
She walked right past the doll's display case.
I believe that Robert the Doll cursed me because I ignored him. I just blew past him on my cell phone, not giving him respect.
Can a child's plaything really possess evil powers?
I'm convinced that Robert is more than just a doll.
David Sloan is a paranormal investigator. He thinks the key to this mystery began in 1904 when a servant of a prominent Key West couple was fired.
What we do know is that the servant felt wronged.
In a bizarre act of revenge, the servant created an effigy of the couple's young son, Eugene, and then gave it to him as a gift.
He looked like a small child. He stood about 3 feet tall. He's stuffed with straw, little black buttons for eyes, and he's dressed in a cute little sailor suit.
From the beginning, Eugene Otto's love for the doll is unusually intense.
Robert and Eugene were inseparable from the moment Robert arrived in the house.
Soon Eugene's parents notice their son is behaving strangely around the doll. They overhear Eugene having conversations, chillingly. There's not one voice, but two. Eugene's behavior then becomes more erratic and violent. He claims Robert is somehow making him do it.
His response was always, I didn't do it, Robert.
Soon, word spreads of weird events at the Otto's home.
Local kids would come by the Otto family home, and they would see Robert sitting in the window of the turret room, and they'd report him moving from side to side, pulling back the shade. The only time that Jean was away from Robert was when he attended an art university in France. And that is where he met his wife, Anne. She was a very accomplished concert pianist. And together they moved back to Key West and back into the Otto residence. Anne was not fond of Robert. Jean spent all his time with him. He'd take him up to his studio. It was a little strange for a grown man to be playing with dolls.
After Eugene's death in 1974, the house is sold. But Robert remains in the attic, and the new owners experience even more terrifying incidents.
There was a plumber who was doing some work up in the attic, and he heard giggling coming from behind him. When he turned around, Robert had moved from from one side of the room over to the other. And this plumber, he ran down the stairs, out of the house, never came back.
Eventually, to rid him from their lives, they donate Robert to a local museum. But the weird behavior doesn't stop. It gets worse.
When you visit the East Martello Museum, you will see hundreds of letters from people who have felt Robert's curse. Some of them say, "I'm sorry I mocked you. Since that happened, I had a flat tire. I was struck by lightning twice."
Heather Clement is just one of them. She is desperate to lift the hex that is destroying her life.
I asked a couple of psychics, what do you do? How do you remove curses?
The answer? Beg forgiveness.
I wrote an apology letter to Robert. It is sealed. What is inside is between Robert and I, and it's private. I'd like to keep it that way. Worst thing I've ever done was to disrespect Robert the doll.
Now, this is really weird, or what? A doll who gets offended by something as trivial as someone walking past him in the wrong way. What is he, some kind of dictator? And then the woman has to write him an apology? That's ridiculous. I mean, if you're gonna get upset enough to curse someone, you might as well have a good reason. How about this, Robert? Dear Robert, I am so sorry I raspberried you just now. Please forgive me.
Is Robert the doll possessed by an evil intelligence? If so, how did he get these terrible powers? Can he genuinely curse those who cross his path?
People who are cursed by Robert seem to bring it on themselves.
Visitors to a Florida museum believe an exhibit is casting evil spells. Is Robert the doll possessed by a curse? Paranormal investigator Chad Lewis has no doubt.
I certainly believe Robert is cursed. Now, whether that curse is man-made with our belief systems, I don't know.
Lewis says the servant who made Robert practiced hoodoo.
Hoodoo is a form of magic that really values conjuring and spells and hexes. It's using a lot of bones, it's using teeth, herbs, and a lot of the spells. Voodoo's a religion, hoodoo's a practice, but more specifically, voodoo's more of a belief system in the black magic, whereas hoodoo is more conjuring, more spells, and you can be belief in voodoo and not practice it, much like you can be a Catholic and never go to church. But with hoodoo, it's more of the practice of the dark arts or the magic.
Lewis is also sure the servant placed a hex on the doll to retaliate for being fired.
The curse was intended to do damage on not only the family, but everybody who visits him as well.
But here comes the crunch. Lewis not only thinks Robert the doll is cursed, but he's alive.
When you visit Robert, you see that there's almost an intelligence to him. Whether it's a soul was placed in him or transferred, I don't know, but something with Robert stands out more than just your ordinary curse.
Is there life behind this wooden demeanor? Lewis is convinced the secret of Robert's supernatural power is a mysterious talisman hidden inside his straw body.
One of the legends is that he has a soul stone placed in him, usually a piece of a different person that has passed.
Once the soul stone was placed inside Robert, the hex was complete. But is he really evil?
I wouldn't say I'm afraid of Robert. I'm certainly creeped out by him, and I'm on notice when I'm around Robert. But being afraid of him, I don't think he'll harm me as long as I'm respectful to him.
Is hoodoo real? Can anyone with the right spell and ingredients put a powerful jinx on anyone or anything? Or is there another explanation? Psychologist Dr. Marilyn Miller thinks something else is at work, and it has nothing to do with supernatural.
I don't believe in curses, but I do believe in the power of the mind. The mind is so powerful that you could actually die from the fear of a curse.
Miller believes Robert's evil power is simply a product of Eugene Otto's imagination.
All children believe that inanimate objects and their toys have human qualities.
But Eugene wasn't like most other children. He never stopped believing Robert was alive.
Gene, the owner of the doll, had his own psychological issues, and perhaps he was left alone a lot with a very vivid imagination.
Miller also thinks once rumors of Robert's evil nature spread, they took on a life and power of their own.
Once that person believes they have been cursed, it can change the chemistry in the body. That person loses their appetite, neglects their health, and simply they feel that they are going to die. It's the human mind that is seeing imposing patterns of relatedness to really unrelated events, especially if they believe that something has put a curse on them. All the things that we learned as children, knock on wood, salt over your shoulder, don't walk under a ladder, we believe these things. And as children, and many adults bring them into adulthood. For example, it gives you a sense of control. If you avoid these things or do certain things, you feel that you've increased the chances of good things happening or preventing bad things from happening. So they're very self-reinforcing.
Are the many curses of Robert simply mass superstition running wild? Or is he really just a doll? How then do we explain his ability to move and manipulate his surroundings? One man thinks he knows. Andy Sway is an energy healer. He not only believes that Robert has dark powers, but we're all to blame.
The story of Robert the Doll is really pretty simple. It's just a case of a lot of people putting a certain negative energy into an object, and others that are in tune with that form of negativity then can receive it when they visit.
Is it possible? Could Robert be a receiver of ominous energy? If so, where does it come from?
The main way that negative energy is transferred is through abuse. One person's issues are inflicted on another person. So that abuse could be mental, physical, verbal, or anything.
Does Robert pick up our worst thoughts and then transmit them back at us as curses and mind games? But how? And why?
I think the whole Robert the Doll story is an example of a snowball effect. Eugene tells the story that Robert the Doll caused these negative events, then the townspeople join in, and now it's internationally famous. So I just think it's snowballed.
Are we to blame for the curse of Robert the Doll? Is he the product of hoodoo magic with an evil talisman hidden deep in his insides? Or is it all in our heads? We're no one. A woman embarks on one of the strangest construction projects in history. Was she driven by angry ghosts?
The spirits were coming back to get their vengeance on her.
You know, I've always been obsessed with DIY. The repairing and renovating my lovely house. After all, it is my castle. Oh! Oh! Yeah, there's nothing like the sense of achievement and satisfaction you get from transforming your surroundings. Oh! Perfecting every detail of the place that you call home. Well, maybe not perfect. You know, there are some home renovations that can take over your life, but it's the ones that take over your afterlife that you really have to worry about.
1860s USA. As pioneers fight and forge their way across America in their quest to conquer the Wild West, perhaps one invention more than any other helped them to succeed. The Winchester rifle. Built by the Winchester Repeating Arms Company, this efficient killing machine not only decimated the Native American population, it made Wirt Winchester and his wife Sarah one of the wealthiest and most respected couples in the country. But for Sarah, the joy of success was short-lived. In 1866, a series of mysterious and tragic events began that would follow her to her grave. Every person who was close to Sarah Winchester inexplicably died. husband, brother, daughter, and father-in-law. What followed has become one of the most bizarre, unsolved mysteries in history. Paranormal investigator Mitchell Whittington wrote about the case.
She had all these blows hit her just in a very short amount of time that had to be completely devastating to her. She lost, to start with, she lost a daughter. She and William had one daughter, and little Annie passed away after only a few weeks. She then, several years later, went through a 10-month period in which she lost her mother, her father-in-law, Mr. Winchester, which she was very close with, and then her own husband, William, died of tuberculosis.
Delirious with grief, Sarah turns to the spirit world and to a medium who can help her communicate with her dead family.
She went to a Boston psychic whose name was Adam Coons, and he was not able to make the contact that she was looking for, but he did have an answer for her.
What the psychic tells her will haunt her for the rest of her life.
He told her that what she was experiencing was a curse.
Even worse, she's told the curse originates with the very thing that earned the family its massive wealth.
She was the sole heir to the Winchester repeating rifle fortune, and so all the spirits of all the people who had been killed in the United States by the Winchester repeating rifles were coming back to get their vengeance on her.
It's horrific news, but the psychic offers Sarah a ray of hope.
He came up with a strategy for her that would allow her to deal with the spirits, and that strategy was to build a house. If she built a big enough house where they could hang out, more or less, that they would stop trying to hurt her and her family.
But there's a catch. The house can never be large enough to contain all the spirits of the dead.
More and more spirits were going to be coming along because, even as they were talking, more and more people were being killed by Winchester repeating rifles.
Faced with this ghostly message from the netherworld, Sarah embraces a curious solution. She will simply keep building her home for as long as she lives. Sarah purchases a farm near San Jose for the construction site.
She hired a team of carpenters, and Sarah would actually tell them exactly where to build and what she wanted. She had a number of people working there all day long, all night long. They say the hammering never stopped.
Winchester House, as it comes to be known, grows apace. But Sarah's obsession with the spirit world exerts a bizarre influence on its design.
She would put in odd staircases that went to nowhere. She would put in trap doors. She would put in doors that you opened up and there was a wall behind. So if the spirits were wandering around, they would get confused and they would hopefully leave her alone.
Sarah becomes an eccentric recluse. She conducts nightly seances, convinced the ghosts of Winchester victims are pursuing her everywhere.
She would sleep in a different bedroom every night, so the spirits would never know exactly where she was. And she would always take a different path to the bedroom, so they would hopefully throw the spirits off.
To defy the spirits, Sarah continues building. The house becomes a Gothic monstrosity, 24,000 square feet with 160 rooms.
And Sarah thought that the number 13 was a good number. It represented safety. So she put the number 13 throughout the house. There's 13 railings in the hallways, 13 steps on the staircase, 13 cupolas in the greenhouse, 13 lights on the chandelier. There's 13 bathrooms in the house, and the 13th bathroom has 13 windows. The room leading into it has 13 panels on the walls, and there's 13 steps leading up to it. And if you go to the sink and look in the drain, there's 13 holes in the drain. 13's everywhere you look. And this went on up until her death, when she finally died in 1922, and it was learned by the workers that Sarah had passed. They all put down their tools and left the property.
Winchester House is still standing today, a unique memorial to almost 40 years of construction. Many believe the ghosts that haunted Sarah are still there. Was Sarah Winchester really the victim of a family curse? Did the blood spilled by Winchester rifles come back to haunt her?
It's hard to believe, isn't it? I mean, Sarah Winchester spends 38 years building a house that only a ghost could love. Bizarre? Well, don't forget this is California we're talking about. You know, apart from the curse, what I find incredible
is finding a building contractor who's willing to work overtime. If you want proof of the supernatural, you get it right there.
Dr. Shelley Kerr is a clinical hypnotherapist who specializes in the supernatural.
I believe in cursed objects. I believe in cursed places, such as the Winchester house.
She believes it wasn't the victims of the Winchester rifle who placed a hex on Sarah, but the man she believed was saving her from it.
I believe she was cursed initially by the psychic who she met in Boston. Her discomfort with the family business combined with her grief made her very susceptible to the message that the psychic gave her.
Kerr thinks Sarah's nightly seances unleashed supernatural forces beyond her control.
I believe she was speaking to many of the people who were killed by the Winchester rifle. She basically invited them in by believing what the psychic told her.
Once inside, the spirits slowly took over Sarah's life and gradually drove her out of her mind.
She created a vortex, and the spirits were coming through, telling her how to build the house. And I believe at that point, they began tormenting her.
Did the psychic's reckless advice start the lifelong haunting of Sarah Winchester?
Sarah had an awful life. She became completely isolated from society. She never went out, and her only communion was with a bunch of spirits. She literally was going mad, and it must have been really painful. If Sarah was my client, she would have to come in, and somehow I would have to work with her until she changed her internal belief system, and she believed that it was possible that she was not responsible for what happened to people who were killed by Winchesters. Assuming that she could get to that place, then she would allow somebody to come into her home, in which case a spiritual cleansing of that home would have to take place. Once the cleansing takes place, though, my guess is the level to which she opened up the door to the spirit world in there, in my personal opinion, is so profound that I don't think she could continue to live there.
Dr. Kerr thinks this story didn't end with Sarah's death. She believes she is still living in Winchester House, along with the ghosts.
She is still haunting her own house. She's stuck there. It seems that she can't get any peace, even in death.
Did Sarah invite malicious spirits into Winchester House through her seances? Did the ghosts drive her insane? Or is there another, more earthly explanation?
I believe that Sarah Winchester was poisoned.
A woman builds a strange and sprawling mansion in the California countryside. Was she haunted by a family curse? Did malicious ghosts drive her mad? New York University toxicology professor Judith Zelikoff doesn't buy it. She has a simple medical explanation.
I don't think that there were really ghosts there. I believe that Sarah Winchester was poisoned by the fumes and the dust of the metals that were produced in her house during the construction time. Back in the turn of the century, lead was used for almost everything. It was thought of as the magic metal. There was lead-based paint. And so all of the paint that they used in the house and they kept using in the house probably contributed to her increase in lead levels.
Zelikoff thinks Sarah was continuously exposed to toxic levels of lead in Winchester House for years.
By sleeping in there, by bathing in there, by drinking in there, she was getting exposed to lead and many of these other metals constantly on a 24-hour-a-day basis.
Was Sarah being slowly poisoned by lead? Could this account for her madness? The key, says Zelikoff, is lead's ability to concentrate in the brain, where it damages critical neurological functions.
Lead affects a specific part of the brain called the limbic system, and it also affects these chemicals that are produced by the brain. We have serotonin, which is the happy neurotransmitter and makes you smile, and then you have the other neurotransmitters. We know that lead can affect these neurotransmitters. We know that it can reduce the serotonin and increase the dopaminergic, and that can lead to things like delusions, paranoia, and obsessive-compulsive behavior. Lead gets to the brain very easily in the soft tissue, and it can kill your brain cells, and it can impact in different areas of the brain.
Professor Zelikoff believes Sarah's strange compulsions are evidence of lead poisoning.
It seemed to me that she was of a very high anxiety and hyperactive behavior in the way she had to get those houses done and never ever stopped. That could all be accounted for by high blood lead levels.
Were Sarah's strange behavior and ghostly obsessions caused by lead poisoning? Sarah Winchester biographer Mary Jo Ignoffo doesn't think so.
The historical evidence indicates that Sarah Winchester was not insane.
She's also sure stories of Sarah Winchester's strange behavior and supernatural obsession are all nonsense.
I don't believe Sarah Winchester was cursed. I think she was a woman living life how she wanted to live her life.
But if Sarah wasn't mad, why did she spend nearly 40 years constructing a giant, maniacal house? Simple. Sarah needed a lot of living space.
When she first came to California, all of her sisters and their families came with her. So initially her intent was to build a very large residence to accommodate a couple different families. She enjoyed and loved and admired architecture, and she spent her time and her money exploring architecture and interior design, not only in her San Jose house, but her other 5 houses as well. That house was her hobby house. And so it was like Sarah Winchester's canvas. And she would say, I would like this built here. And she would instruct her builders to build it. And then she would say, oh, I don't really like that. I think you need to take it down and let's redo it this way. Oh, no, I don't like that. And so she kept going on that course for many, many years.
But does this explain why Sarah built twisting hallways and doorways to nowhere? Ignoffo reveals that they were never intended to be part of the original design. They were the result of the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, which caused severe damage to Winchester House.
She built a tower that reached to 7 stories, and that tower tumbled in the earthquake in onto the house, and she lost the top 3 floors of her house.
According to Ignoffo, Sarah ordered her workers to close off all the affected stairs and doorways. So if Sarah wasn't cursed and wasn't crazy, why all the speculation about her life?
All the negative stories that started to come out about Sarah Winchester in the press came out at exactly the same time that the American conscience started to acknowledge atrocities visited on Native Americans. Because Sarah Winchester's money comes from the arms industry, that seems to make her more of a target.
Was Winchester House born of a family curse? Or was it inspired by its owner's mental illness? Or was it just a flight of fancy for a woman with more money than architectural sense? Weird, or what? So there we have it, stories of curses from around the world. In Britain, a mysterious painting is linked to a rash of home fires. Does the crying boy bring fiery destruction wherever it goes? In Florida, a sinister toy brings misfortune down on the unsuspecting. Can Robert the Doll destroy your life? And in California, a mysterious house bears witness to a family's dark past. Is Winchester House cursed by ghosts? Are these strange stories proof that curses are real? You decide.
Join me next time for more stories that will undoubtedly be weird, or what? You know, I've been around for a while. I've met some interesting people. Done some crazy things. You'd think that there wasn't much that could take me by surprise. You'd be wrong. The world is full of stories and science and things that amaze and confound me every single day. Incredible mysteries that keep me awake at night. Some I can answer, and others just defy logic.
Does the human body contain mysteries beyond the realm of medical science? In a California hospital, dozens fall mysteriously ill after coming in contact with one woman.
Real fear set in when we realized we didn't know what it was.
Did she become a living chemical weapon? In New York, a man is struck by lightning and turns into a musical genius.
Something happened in his brain, and he developed this incredible passion to play the piano.
Can our brains be rewired? And in Tennessee, a young man cries tears of blood.
I thought maybe I was going to pass away because I thought I was going to bleed out.
But no one knows why.
Yeah, it's a weird world. I love it. The human body. If you're like me, you probably take for granted it. You walk around inside one of the most sophisticated, complex organisms in existence. You probably think you know a lot about it. But here's some stuff I bet you didn't know. There are 250,000 sweat glands in each of your feet, producing over a liter of sweat every day. No wonder they stink. Earwax is necessary for healthy ears. Your tongue is the strongest muscle in your body. Throughout your life, you will produce enough saliva to fill a typical backyard pool. A full bladder is about the size of a softball. And finally, most men have regular erections while they sleep. Not now, okay? It's amazing, isn't it? But how do they know this stuff? Is there anything modern medicine can't accomplish? Well, I can tell you. There is one thing. They can't explain the incredible story of Gloria Ramirez.
February 19th, 1994. Respiratory therapist Maureen Welch is working nights at a hospital outside Los Angeles.
I remember being on my shift, working in the neonatal intensive care unit, not having a lot of patients, and covering the emergency room.
But the calm ends when a desperately ill patient is brought into the ER.
We received a call that we were receiving a 20-something woman coming in for respiratory distress.
31-year-old Gloria Ramirez is suffering from advanced cancer. She is fighting for her life.
She was in profound distress. Her condition was not looking well. Her color was poor. Her oxygen exchange was poor. Her ability to even speak in a sentence was remiss. It wasn't available.
But there's something else about Gloria that troubles Maureen.
There was an oily sheen on her body, kind of a garlicky smell. It wasn't overt, it was very mild. It would be almost something you'd miss if you weren't looking for it.
That's not all. When a routine blood sample is taken, Maureen is stunned to see Gloria's blood is full of strange crystals. It also has a weird odor.
I said, does anybody smell that? What are you talking about? The blood, don't you smell it?
Somehow, Gloria's blood reeks of the hazardous chemical, ammonia.
We had a shiny body, we had smelly blood, we had crystals in the blood.
Despite the puzzling symptoms, the medical staff battled to save Gloria's life.
Her condition began to deteriorate. All the medical professionals were getting in position for this severe situation.
Suddenly, Nurse Susan Kane is overcome with nausea.
She picked up the syringe and then she collapsed.
Before Maureen can react, she also blacks out.
And the next time I woke up, I was incapacitated. IVs in my arm, and I was on a gurney with medical issues that I didn't know how I had gotten them. All I knew was that I was sick, and I didn't know if I was going to survive or not at that time.
More of Gloria's trauma team succumb. The exact cause is a mystery, but one thing seems certain. Whatever it is, it's coming from Gloria.
That was when real fear set in, when we realized what we had, but didn't know what it was. When it was first aired, they said they thought it was organophosphate poisoning. And that sounded good, you know? After the fact, organophosphate would have been fine because they knew how to treat organic phosphate poisoning. And some of us were treated for it, which made us even sicker.
Panic erupts in the ER, and the department is evacuated.
There were ambulances and fire trucks and paramedics and all kinds of people around us.
A skeleton medical crew bravely remains to work on Gloria. But soon after, she tragically dies. Whatever is loose in the ER is spreading. 23 of the 37 ER staff have bizarre and frightening symptoms that require medical attention.
I was admitted to a hospital. I was there for a week. I had several apneic events, according to my husband, and I did not respond to him. And during that time, I had memory loss and aphasia. I was not able to speak well. My language had been, in some way, deranged.
Maureen's colleague, Dr. Julie Gorczynski, is worst affected. She contracts hepatitis, pancreatitis, and avascular necrosis, a disease that literally kills the bones of her legs. Gorczynski spends weeks in intensive care.
The reality is that no one knew what was going on.
A hazardous materials team is sent into Gloria's trauma room.
You know, they investigated every drain, took every air sample, bagged the body so that no one else would be exposed. And in the days to follow, there was going to be a toxic, very high-profile autopsy.
But the autopsy fails to find a plausible explanation. To this day, the Gloria Ramirez outbreak remains a mystery. Maureen Welch recovers, but her life is never the same.
It took me 6 to 8 months to get back where I was before it happened. But I still have some of those moments with speech that don't allow me to express myself the way I once did.
What caused 23 experienced ER staff to fall ill? Was Gloria Ramirez's blood toxic? Psychologist Dr. Melissa Sexton doubts it. Why? Not everyone who treated Gloria got sick.
Why didn't the paramedics who were attending her also experience the same symptoms?
Dr. Sexton is convinced the answer is an illness not of the body, but of the mind. A condition known as conversion disorder. It makes people ill purely through the power of suggestion.
Conversion disorder is a set of symptoms that are not explained by any organic cause. Increased heart palpitation, fainting, nausea, vomiting, headaches, paralysis, or numbness, or loss of speech or hearing. And traditionally that's been the case, that young females are more susceptible to experiencing conversion disorder type symptoms. It is a lot like mass hysteria. They won't be feigning those symptoms, they'll be real, but there'll be no cause biologically or neurologically even.
The disorder's frightening symptoms arise from a surprising source, the power of suggestion.
And if they see other people develop symptoms such as rashes or headaches or nausea, then that might trigger a response that mimics those symptoms, and so it spreads, it becomes contagious in that kind of way. Much like a yawn. If I were to yawn and you yawn.
In Dr. Sexton's view, it makes sense the disorder would take hold in a trauma unit.
If you've ever worked in an emergency room, you know that you have to operate on adrenaline a lot of times. Everything's heightened, and if there's an unexplained noxious odor, and someone faints because of the odor, it seemed like it was a ripe situation for conversion disorder to occur. I'm not saying that every person that experienced symptoms should be diagnosed with conversion disorder. There could be a real causation to the symptoms, but I am saying that it is likely that other people, other bystanders witnessing this whole event, and I don't mean the death of Gloria Ramirez alone, but the whole event that surrounded her death. It's likely that there were people that suffer from conversion disorder.
Did the ER staff succumb to a case of mass hysteria? Can people be sickened by a toxin that's only in their minds? Or was it something else?
It has been used in the past as a chemical warfare agent.
ER staff at a California hospital fall gravely ill after treating a patient. Did Gloria Ramirez have toxic blood? Biochemist Michael Shaw thinks the incident was caused by something extraordinary.
I believe what happened to the people in the ER was they were exposed to a toxic compound. It has been used in the past as a chemical warfare agent.
Specifically, a highly toxic nerve gas known as dimethyl sulfate.
The symptoms experienced by the people in the ER very closely mirror the textbook symptoms that are listed for dimethyl sulfate. Tearing of eyes, respiratory symptoms, difficulty in breathing, convulsions, loss of muscular control, and at high enough exposure, death.
The gas is so toxic, even minute quantities are lethal.
Dimethyl sulfate carries what's called IDLH, or immediate danger to life and health, of 7 parts per million, which is not a very high concentration. It has been suggested that perhaps twice that level could kill somebody pretty quickly. So, looking backward, the fact that there were non-lethal consequences meant it was a much smaller exposure.
How did a deadly nerve gas get into a hospital ER? Remarkably, for once, it has nothing to do with a CIA plot.
Dimethyl sulfate that was actually produced in the body of the patient, Gloria Ramirez, hence the name, the toxic lady.
Now, just wait a second here. What did you say again?
Dimethyl sulfate that was actually produced in the body of the patient, Gloria Ramirez.
Right, that's what I thought he said. Now, this story's getting too weird. Or what? This guy is trying to tell us that Gloria had somehow become a chemical warfare factory? How the heck does a human body produce a lethal toxic gas? I can't imagine how that's possible.
Shaw says the answer lies inside Gloria herself.
The evidence came from a lot of work that was done at Lawrence Livermore Labs. They found metabolites in her body that could produce the dimethyl sulfate toxic compound.
Can a human body create its own lethal nerve gas? How? The key is a home remedy Gloria was using. It's called DMSO.
Gloria Ramirez was using DMSO in very large amounts. Dimethyl sulfoxide, DMSO, is primarily used as a solvent in chemical manufacturing. Back some years ago, largely based on the work of a Dr. Stanley Jacob, they discovered that there were certain medicinal properties for this compound, based on the rather unusual property that it penetrates skin. There are very few chemicals that penetrate skin, especially to the extent of DMSO. In fact, you can rub it on your skin and within a couple of minutes, taste it in your mouth. So it's very quickly absorbed. It was discovered that if you rub it on parts of your body that ache, it's fairly effective as an analgesic. And there was a lot of work being done on this compound until a story came out of some woman in Ireland that had a sprained wrist, who was rubbing it on her wrist and then apparently died, supposedly as a result of some allergic reaction to this compound. Suddenly, the FDA canceled all the work they were doing on it, and Dr. Jacob was later to observe that they seldom show such interest in a single death in a clinical study. DMSO has been used for many years as a topical medication rubbed on the area of the body to relieve pain in such things as arthritis.
Gloria needed DMSO to help her cope with cancer.
It is said that people that use a lot of it end up smelling like garlic, and not in a good way. The natural metabolic product in the body of anybody using DMSO rubbing on themselves is dimethylsulfone.
On its own, dimethylsulfone in Gloria's bloodstream was harmless. But it underwent another, more dangerous transformation.
There are many strange things that can happen in a human body in an ER. There was a lot of oxygen used. There was electricity used for a defibrillation of the patient. So now you're catalyzing a very unlikely chemical reaction to the toxic compound dimethyl sulfate.
Shaw's convinced it was this combination that turned innocent muscle rub into deadly nerve gas.
In the act of withdrawing the blood, there seemed to be enough dimethyl sulfate vapor coming off this blood sample to produce these effects. Fortunately, not enough present to kill the people, but enough present to get them sick.
Did Gloria's blood produce a deadly toxin? Was it the product of a bizarre medical fluke? Or were there other, even stranger chemicals in the ER that day? Susan Goldsmith is an investigative journalist.
The paramedics that took Gloria Ramirez to the hospital gave her an IV, and nobody became ill in that ambulance. And so the theory that somehow she was fuming, she was toxic, doesn't hold up when you actually look at the evidence. The county's ultimate theory on what happened was that mass hysteria had taken hold in this emergency room. And one of the sources in my story said these are people who are used to accident victims and ATV victims and people being brought in very bad condition, and they are not prone to mass hysteria.
She believes the explanation has nothing to do with nerve gas.
There was a theory forwarded by a couple of scientists with Lawrence Livermore Lab that a medication Gloria Ramirez was taking for her cervical cancer interacted with some oxygen in the ER that night and created this toxic environment. I spoke with the world's leading expert on that medication for my story, who told me the theory simply wasn't credible. There was no known history of that drug ever doing anything of the sort, and he said that the research was never published because it simply wasn't a credible theory. The symptoms that the people in the emergency room experienced that night, many of them were totally consistent with being exposed to meth chemicals. The chemicals that are used in the manufacturing of meth are highly toxic. Somebody had a meth lab inside that hospital, and they were using the IV bags to transport the chemicals, and one of them ended up in the emergency room that night.
A secret meth lab in an urban California hospital. It's not as unlikely as it sounds, according to Goldsmith. At the time, the area was the meth capital of the world.
Meth labs had been found in a preschool or a daycare center and in a lot of other places throughout the county. A hospital is a very logical place for meth chemicals to be manufactured because there's a lot of chemicals around, there's a lot of smells, people know how to deal with different kinds of chemicals.
Goldsmith's theory even explains Gloria's strange odor.
The fumes and smells associated with meth labs are ammonia-like odors and sewer-like odors. And there had been several reports at this hospital prior to the Gloria Ramirez incident of patients becoming sick and reporting ammonia-like odors and sewer-like odors.
But how did Gloria come into contact with the chemicals? Goldsmith thinks one of the IV bags being used to smuggle them was hooked up to Gloria by accident.
So they put in an IV bag and someone smelled ammonia-like fumes, and very quickly people became quite ill and the ER was evacuated.
But if this was the cause of the trauma team's collapse, why didn't anything turn up in the investigation?
The record showed that they disposed of all of Gloria Ramirez's blood. Gloria Ramirez's autopsy was unprecedented. They had workers going in spacesuits with special oxygen being delivered to them via umbilical cords. They had constructed a special chamber inside the coroner's office for the autopsy. People monitored the autopsy via video monitor, and they had hazmat and fire crews standing by right outside. Hospital officials were facing a lot of liability. Maybe the meth lab operators made sure that all the evidence went away.
Was the Ramirez incident a case of mass hysteria? Did Gloria's blood generate a deadly nerve gas? Or were the ER staff felled by chemicals from a secret meth lab? Whatever the truth, the diagnosis is definitely weird, or what? In New York, a man struck by lightning turns into a musical genius.
A near-death experience profoundly changes the individual afterward.
Moonlight Sonata. This famous piece by Beethoven was dedicated to the student he fell in love with. Beautiful, isn't it? You know, I adore classical music, and I just love the piano.
Pity I can't play it. Yeah, I know I should have kept up my lessons. Now it's too late because to master an instrument like this takes a lifetime, right? Wrong. You can do it in a flash.
Albany, New York, August 1994. Orthopedic surgeon Tony Sicori is on the phone to his mother when the weather takes an ominous turn for the worse. What happens next will become one of the most baffling stories in medical history. Ingrid Wickelgren is an editor of Scientific American Mind.
He was just about to hang up the phone when some clouds came in. Suddenly, he heard this loud crack. He saw a flash. The bolt of lightning hit Dr. Sicori in the face. He was blown backward about 15 feet or so, and he apparently went into cardiac arrest.
Tony is clinically dead, but his mind is very much alive.
He saw his own body near him, but apart from him, and he thought, oh, I guess I'm dead. He wasn't upset that he was dead. Instead, he sort of felt at peace. And he reports that he sort of felt like he was jumping for joy at kind of being, on the other side. And yeah, he had some further apparitions, I guess, of floating up the stairs and seeing his children in their room playing and thinking, oh yeah, they'll be fine. And then floating out of the building and being surrounded by this bluish-white light. So, and it was all very peaceful and happy at this time.
In an out-of-body experience, Tony watches a passerby rush to his aid.
The body landed right next to a woman who happened to be a nurse who was waiting to use the phone. That nurse immediately began performing CPR on him.
Miraculously, she brings Tony back to life.
Lightning strikes can be deadly, so it's not unreasonable to think he might have died without her assistance.
Although technically dead just minutes earlier, Tony now feels fine. He even declines all further help.
Well, he refused to go to the hospital. It's not totally clear to me why. I think maybe he figured, well, you're hit with lightning, you're either dead or you're alive. He happened to be alive. Or maybe he just didn't want to go to the emergency room. He'd been through enough.
Amazingly, it appears Tony has suffered no ill effects from the lightning strike. And for a time, his life seems to return to normal.
He saw his cardiologist when he went home, and his heart actually checked out fine.
But soon after, Tony becomes aware of a peculiar change within.
Dr. Sicori developed an incredible passion for music. Instead of the old rock that he preferred, he suddenly needed to hear piano music, classical piano music.
A former football player, Tony has never listened to classical music before in his life. Now, his head is filled with it.
He ran out to the store and bought CDs. And he bought this one CD of this pianist playing Chopin, and he played it on his way to work, on his way home from work, and then over and over and over again.
Soon, just listening to music isn't enough. Tony has an overpowering desire to play it. He borrows a friend's piano.
So we bought the sheet music for every piece on that CD, and he starts practicing.
Learning the piano becomes an obsession.
And he practices 4 to 6 hours a day. He gets up in the morning at 4 o'clock and plays for a couple hours. He gets home, the kids go to bed, he plays. Again, he practices by himself. The adult brain does not learn these complex musical skills very well, and he was 42 at the time. Remarkably, Dr. Sicori became an extremely skilled piano player. He plays with great emotion, and that reflects the fact that, he's developed this passion for the music.
Tony's obsession then takes another turn. Not only can he play music, he discovers he can write it.
He had a dream in which he was playing a piece. And when he woke up, the piece was still in his mind, and he realized this piece had never been played before. This is his own music. He decided he was going to write it down and compose that piece of music that came to him in his dream.
From having no musical skills at all, Tony is now creating entire symphonies, almost at will. Then, just a few years after his accident, Tony is given the chance to perform in public.
In 2002, Dr. Sikoria debuted his newfound interest in piano in front of an audience. He must have been really nervous, but excited, and he played with great emotion. It got great reviews.
It's an achievement that still mystifies both scientists and music critics alike.
Becoming a professional pianist is incredibly difficult. The idea that people would come and listen to someone who, by all rights, should be an amateur is remarkable.
You know, this story is truly amazing, even miraculous. One day, you're just a normal guy, and then, boom, everything changes. Where did Tony's extraordinary talent suddenly come from? Surely the lightning had something to do with it. In fact, many survivors of lightning strikes claim remarkable changes in their lives occur after the event. I want to see if they're right. Now, don't try this at home. Funny, except for a need to lift my leg, I don't feel any different.
Where did Tony Sikoria's extraordinary talent come from? Can lightning turn someone into a musical genius? Phyllis Atwater has been researching near-death experiences for over 30 years. She thinks Sikoria's newfound musical talent was triggered by his brush with death.
A near-death experience is an intense awareness, sense, or experience of otherworldliness that happens at the edge of death that profoundly changes the individual afterward.
But how can Atwater be so sure? First-hand experience.
I died 3 times in 1977 in 3 months. Death number 1 was January the 2nd. It was extreme hemorrhaging and a miscarriage. Death number 2 was 2 days later. Major thrombosis in the right thigh vein, which dislodged, followed by the worst case of phlebitis the specialist had ever heard of, let alone seen. 3 months later, they're not really sure what killed me. They thought maybe it might have been heart attacks. I reached this realm where we in research call the realm of all-knowing, where all of the puzzle pieces of life are revealed, all of your questions are answered. Let me just say that, yes, it changed my life.
Atwater believes these changes are not just psychological.
Near-death experiences are very powerful, so powerful that they tend to change the individual in specific ways. Often your personality will alter or differ. The way you speak will change. There are physiological changes in the body afterward. We don't hear much about those. We hear about the psychological ones, that you don't fear death anymore, that you come back more service-oriented, more loving, more caring. We don't hear about the physiological ones, and those are profound. It changes the body clock with most people, changes brain dominance with most people, changes brain structure and function with most people. There's a pattern of changes in the nervous system, the digestive system, and skin sensitivity.
Did a lightning strike turn Tony Sikoria into a musical virtuoso?
It opens up the creative doors. You are inspired, and you want to create things, you want to do things. It's almost as if you are suddenly kissed by the muses. All that creativity that is existent within all of us suddenly bubbles up. And you want to express it, you want to share it, and many times it can become obsessive.
Did Tony Sikoria become a modern-day Mozart thanks to a near-death experience? Was his mind altered in ways beyond our comprehension? Or did something even more remarkable happen?
Things make a lot of sense when you believe in reincarnation.
A bolt of lightning turns a man into a musical genius. Does a near-death experience account for his talent? Spiritualist Dr. Susan Shumsky doesn't see it that way.
There's no such thing as having a talent given to you out of the blue.
Shumsky believes Tony's newfound skills came from his very distant past.
You know, there's a lot of things that make a lot of sense when you believe in reincarnation. Tony had a dream that he described. Him on stage playing his own musical composition as a pianist. That was not a dream. That was a past life memory.
How was Tony able to recall a memory from a previous life?
We develop many skills through lifetime after lifetime after lifetime as we reincarnate. The mind stores all of our memories, not only from this life, but from all previous lifetimes. And we can tap into that storehouse and we can develop talents and abilities that we have developed in past lives.
Shumsky is convinced the lightning strike allowed Tony's brain to access more than just memories, but past life skills as well.
Tony was a composer and a musician in his past lives. When Tony had his bolt of lightning, I believe that this lit up parts of his brain. This awakened something in himself that he already had. His natural ability started to come out. The skills of music, composition, playing a piano, that he had been that in a past life.
Shumsky says the bolt out of the blue steered Tony towards his true destiny.
Tony says that he's a different person, but I believe that now Tony is more himself than he's ever been.
Do we all have former lives very different from our own? And can we harness past life skills and use them in the present? Neuroscientist Dr. Brent Harris agrees something profound happened to Tony Sikoria, but he doesn't think it had anything to do with reincarnation.
When the brain gets shocked by a lightning strike, it's impossible to know exactly what's going to happen because it can have a severe effect that causes massive damage to the brain, or it can be actually fairly mild and cause no noticeable damage.
However, in Tony's case, Dr. Harris believes the lightning literally rewired his brain.
An incident like this is 1 in a million. It's possible that the lightning strike that affected Dr. Sikoria's brain altered his frontal lobe neurocircuitry, releasing him to follow a newfound talent in music.
How is this possible? And why music?
The frontal lobe helps to control creativity and our ability to make decisions about, whether we want to be creative or not. And so when changes happen in the frontal lobe, we become less inhibited. The neural circuitry may have become changed to reawaken innate ability in him or an ability that developed during childhood that had been somewhat repressed for most of his life. I believe as a neuroscientist that we certainly have developmental periods where we are changing the circuitry within our brain, making it stronger, making it weaker, based on what we're doing. And that's why during early childhood development, it's so important to expose kids to music, to reading, to physical activity, so that their brain development parallels their body development.
But if Tony's brain was rewired, why didn't his new musical abilities begin immediately?
I think that probably relates to some recovery time after the lightning strike and the intense training that he started doing again immediately during that time period to re-energize those specific areas of the brain that were important in music.
Did Tony's brain get rewired by a lightning bolt? Do near-death experiences alter the way we think and act? Or can skills from our past lives be transferred to the present? Whatever the answer, Tony's story is weird. Or what? In Tennessee, a teen cries tears of blood.
This is a warning from God.
The Virgin Mary. Beautiful, isn't she? Throughout history, religious iconography has been one of the most powerful influences on mankind. Everywhere, symbols of our faith are represented in statues, paintings, architecture, nearly everything.
But there's another side to these objects, one that has baffled both scientists and the church alike. Over the last century, a new phenomenon has begun to manifest itself. A series of statues has been discovered that seem to bleed, a sign which many say is a message from a greater power. Is it possible? Most are easily discounted as hoaxes, but now there's a new debate raging. Why? Because it's happened again. But this time, it's not a statue. It's a human.
Rockwood, Tennessee, 2009. Like many other boys his age, 15-year-old Calvino Inman is enjoying life at junior high school. But one morning in early May, Calvino's life takes a bizarre and frightening turn.
I was getting out of the shower and I was wiping the mirror because I was about to dry off. And I looked into the mirror and I seen my eyes were bleeding and I freaked out. Streaming down my face and running down my cheek.
Calvino has no other symptoms and has never had a problem with his eyes.
Some of everything went through my mind when I first seen that. I got nervous, I got scared. I thought maybe I was going to pass away because I thought I was going to bleed out.
Horrified, he rushes downstairs to his mother, Tammy.
I said, what'd you do? You scratch yourself? I'm not knowing exactly what he's talking about. So by the time I get up close to him, I'm seeing that the blood is coming down both eyes. So I panic. He's scared, I'm terrified.
She races him to the hospital. But by the time they get to the ER, the bleeding has stopped.
When I got to the hospital, they pretty much act as if we were lying about everything.
They done an eye exam on him, couldn't find no traces of the blood, so they looked at us and like, okay, well, if it happens again, come back.
Calvino doesn't have to wait long. The next day, the tears of blood return.
The very next day, here we go flying right back up there.
This time they reach the hospital in time for the doctors to witness the phenomenon.
The doctor starts sucking blood out of his eyes, so they was testing him.
But the tests reveal nothing.
A couple of weeks went by, and the only thing we got out of it was, you know, he still has 20/20 vision, but it's his blood. We just don't know where it's coming from. Yes, my son's normal, but there's nothing normal about bleeding from the eyes.
Calvino's condition gets worse. He begins crying blood for hours.
The longest one that I can remember, I think, was about 2.5, almost 3 hours.
Calvino's strange affliction also starts to impact his personal life.
There was people, they'd just come up and stare at me. They wouldn't say not one word to me, they'd stare at me and then walk away. People were getting ignorant and they were talking about how they didn't really want me going to their school. People were telling me that I was possessed. They were just saying all kinds of crazy stuff.
He was riding on his moped one day, and literally a woman in a SUV ran him off the road.
I missed almost all of school because of all this stuff going. The times that I was there was drama, and I didn't really want to be there. And then the times that I wasn't there was drama, and I still didn't want to be there. It got to the point where I just wanted to be at home and lay in bed all day.
Calvino is so traumatized, he becomes a recluse. And then the condition begins to spread.
When it came out of my mouth, that was a lot of blood. And it wasn't like it was coming out of my tongue or nothing. It's like I was vomiting out blood, pure blood.
Today, doctors still don't have a cause or a cure for Calvino's mysterious bleeding.
Blood comes from my eyes, nose, and my mouth. It comes randomly, you never know. Honestly, I have no clue on what happened, what I could have done to make this happen to me.
I still keep the faith that one day that somebody's gonna eventually have an answer for this.
I pray that it'll stop, and I have people who pray for me that it will stop.
Why does an otherwise healthy teen cry tears of blood? Demonologist and professional exorcist Chris Ward thinks the answer is obvious.
I believe that Calvino's tears could be the very first stage of a possession.
Demonic possession, having your soul taken over by an evil spirit, or even the devil himself. It's a truly terrifying prospect. Do these malevolent beings actually exist?
The devil is real. In fact, there are devils, there are demons, there are curses, there are hexes, spells. They're all very real, and they can completely destroy your life.
But how do possessions happen?
Demons enter through traumatic experiences. It can also happen through generational curses.
With their spirit weakened by some traumatic event, Ward believes the victim's soul becomes ripe for demonic picking.
Possession to me is like a personality hijacking, that there are disembodied spirits that actually thirst for a body and will want to come in and completely bully out your personality and take over your body. So it's like a hijacking.
Is a demon trying to take over Calvino Inman? Chris Ward also believes there might be another force at work inside him, but it's a little more friendly.
It's a possibility that this is a warning from God. Oftentimes in the Old Testament, whenever God had to correct a nation or correct a people, he often sent a prophet or a warning. I believe it's a good possibility God is using Calvino to give a message to people.
Is a battle between good and evil raging inside Calvino? Chris Ward thinks it's a possibility we must consider.
I believe that God is trying to reach out to us and give us a chance to repent and return to a world where we do have accountability towards our fellow man.
Is Calvino Inman possessed by a demon? Are his tears of blood a warning of impending apocalypse? Or is there something even more bizarre at work?
Calvino's tears of blood could indicate that he's a vampire.
A Tennessee teenager cries tears of blood, seemingly without a cause. Is he possessed by demonic spirits or a messenger from God? American Studies PhD student John Browning is a monster expert. He asks us to consider a different explanation.
In my opinion, Calvino's tears of blood could indicate that he's a vampire. He exhibits a major feature that we see in the modern-day vampire. By crying tears of blood, we see a lot of what's going on in True Blood or what we read in Interview with the Vampire.
Vampires are the stuff of nightmares. Do they really exist?
My ethnographic study is people who live in New Orleans who self-identify as vampire. And what that means is that they consume human blood or animal blood or take what they call psychic energy. Sometimes they do both. A sanguine vampire is someone who consumes blood. A psychic vampire is someone who consumes psychic energy. And a hybrid is someone who does both. And that condition, this desire to take one or the other, is something that they experience very early in life, generally around puberty. And if they don't take one or the other, they feel unnaturally weak. They can eat plenty of food, vitamins, you name it, and they still won't feel particularly normal or healthy until they discover that if they consume one or the other, it helps them and they feel better. For them, it's more or less something that they have to do. If they don't take the blood, then they will begin to feel weak. Some of them have tried to test themselves by not doing it and wound up putting themselves in the hospital.
So are Calvino's tears of blood a sign that he's turning into a creature of the night?
Crying tears of blood harkens back to cases in the 1600s and 1700s in Europe where villagers were exhuming bodies of people who were suspected of being vampires. There would be blood coming from the mouth, eyes, nose of the corpse, which they just assumed was the blood of the victims the vampire had been feeding on. And especially prominent was the blood coming from the eye area.
But Browning cautions us not to go running for our crucifixes and wooden stakes just yet. Tears of blood alone don't make Calvino a vampire.
If Calvino were a vampire, he would need to exude more than just blood from his eyes. There would be other characteristics. For example, you might see some of Calvino's relatives or neighbors complaining at night that they see visions of Calvino, that he visits them in their dreams, that they see him popping up in their bedrooms at night, and they would have to complain of lack of energy, and in some cases, blood.
For Browning, only time will tell if Calvino is becoming a vampire, but he has a stark warning.
If Calvino is becoming a vampire, I don't think he can stop the process.
So this young innocent boy, Calvino's a vampire. I mean, come on. I know vampires are all the rage at the moment, but do they really expect us to believe that these blood-sucking monsters really exist? Just in case.
Are Calvino Inman's bloody tears a sign that he is becoming a vampire? Ophthalmologist Dr. Alan Shlomovic doesn't see the supernatural in Calvino's tears, but he finds them no less amazing.
This is a very rare condition. I think there may be 5 articles in all of the peer-reviewed journals that review this. I've been doing this for 26 years. I think I've seen one other case of hemolacria. Hemolacria just means blood in the tears.
For Dr. Slomovic, hemolacria is just the beginning of this medical mystery.
Blood showing up from anywhere in the body is usually an ominous sign, although it can be due to many things. It's a symptom, it's not a disease.
But a symptom of what?
There's a spectrum of diseases that will cause hemolacria. There's infection, there's inflammation, there's certain bleeding disorders. There's been another case report in the literature where there was a lady from Zimbabwe who had tuberculosis of her nasal sinuses, and this resulted in hemolacria. I don't think that's what Calvino has, but there are other more worrisome conditions, such as a tumor, which could block the natural flow of the tears out of the eye. The good side of it is I don't think he's losing enough blood that it would affect his overall well-being. So I think that that would be something you'd have to check, is his overall hemoglobin, hematocrit, just to make sure that that stays within normal limits. And also I'd be concerned about his bleeding through other mucosal membranes.
Although confident there's a scientific explanation for Calvino's condition, Dr. Slomovic admits it may never be found.
I know that he's had CAT scans and MRIs. It's just one of these unusual circumstances that we cannot explain.
Is Calvino Inman a medical enigma? Are tears of blood a sign of possession by a higher or diabolical power? Or is this proof that vampires exist? Weird. Or what? So, there we have it. 3 stories of medical mysteries. A woman becomes so toxic she sickens dozens of people. Did her body produce nerve gas? Lightning turns a man into a musical prodigy. Can trauma trigger hidden talents? And a young man sheds tears of blood. Is it a sign of impending Armageddon? You decide.
Join me next time for more stories that will undoubtedly be weird, or what?